The tile outside nursery corridor 7 had been clean for 11 days. I knew it was clean. I had mopped it every night, but I kept mopping it, because the alternative was standing, still in the dark at 3 in the morning, with nothing but the squeak of my bucket wheels and the sound coming through that door, and I didn't much care for the sound coming through that door. It wasn't crying exactly. The Careth word for it, as best as I understood from the junior attendant who sometimes lingered to talk to me, was something that translated roughly to the grief call of an unheld thing. 7-year-old Sauvan, third heir to the Ardeni bloodline, Lord Designate of 4-star systems. I couldn't have found on a map, had been making that sound since the night his mother left on the diplomatic transit to the outer corridors. She would be gone for 60 days. He had been making the sound for 11 of them. 3 royal physicians had failed. 2 Careth child behavioral counselors had failed. A Durthari sleep specialist of considerable reputation. I was told she had soothed the grief. 37 heir children, across 14 species, had packed her instruments and left on the second day. The admiral himself, Sauvan's father, a man whose face I had seen on the ship's commissions plaques for 6 years without ever exchanging more than a corridor nod, reportedly sat beside his son's bed for 4 hours and achieved nothing except that Sauvan moved from the center of the bed to the wall side and turned his back. None of that was my business. I mopped corridor 7. I mopped it at 0200 and again at 0300 and sometimes, if the sound had been bad, again at 0400. I'd been a custodian on the Ardeni Reach. 6 years. Before that, 14 years on a freight hauler out of the Kepler depots. Before that, a decade of maintenance contracts on whatever station would take a 50-year-old man with a bad knee and a good work record. I was 58 years old. I had mopped a great many floors. Corridor 7 outside the nursery wing was among the cleaner ones. I hummed while I worked. I always had. It wasn't anything in particular. An old earth melody my father used to sing when he was fixing the boiler in building's basement, something repetitive and low and without much ambition. 3 notes going down, 2 going up, then back around. It had no name that I knew. It was just the sound my hands made when they needed something to do. On the 12th night, the sound through the door stopped. I didn't notice right away. I was working the mop in long, slow strokes and watching the reflection of the corridor light in the wet tile, which is a thing I do when my mind has gone quiet. When I finally looked up, I realized the nursery had gone silent. Not the tense silence of a held breath, not the silence between one wave and the next, just quiet. The kind of quiet that has settled in and decided to stay. I stood there for a moment. Then I started mopping again, because a quiet corridor 7 was no concern of mine, and a clean tile was a clean tile regardless of the reason. The door opened. The attendant who stepped out was a young Velhari woman named Essie, whom I had exchanged perhaps 30 words with over 6 years, mostly about where I left the cleaning cart. She looked at me, the way people look at something that has appeared where they weren't expecting to find. Then she looked back into the room, then at me again. "What are you doing?" she said. "Mopping," I said. "You were humming." I was. She looked into the room again. "I didn't. I went back to work." "He's asleep," she said. "Good," I said. She stood in the doorway for another moment, then closed it softly and went back inside. I finished the tile. I moved the bucket to the next section of corridor and started on that one. Fice 0430 I was done, and I went back to the custodial bay and put the equipment away and went to my bunk. The next night, Essie was waiting by the door at 0300. She didn't say anything, she just stood there. I nodded at her and started on the tile and began humming, and after about 10 minutes, she slipped back inside. From under the door I could see the narrow band of interior light. It stayed on for a while, then went out. The third night, Essie wasn't there. One of the royal physicians was. He was a tall Careth male in full medical formal wear, standing in the middle of corridor 7, with his hands clasped behind his back, watching me the way a man watches something he cannot quite categorize. I mopped around him. After about 20 minutes, he said, "Do you understand what you are doing?" "Mopping corridor 7, I said. "Before that?" I was humming. "What were you humming?" I thought about it. Something my father used to sing. "I don't know the name. 3 notes down, 2 up, repeat." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, I have studied air-child grief responses for 19 years. I have worked with Kareth children, Dertheri children, the Velhari twin-bonded pairs that are considered the most complex separation cases in the Reach's medical literature. He paused. The air-child's neural architecture in early grief states requires low-frequency, resonant patterning to interrupt the cortical loop. We have instruments designed specifically for that purpose, calibrated, tested across 400 cases. I just have the tune, I said. Yes, he said. He said it the way a man says something that has cost him something to say. That appears to be sufficient. He stood there a while longer, watching the mop move, and I could see him working at something in his head. Some equation that wasn't adding up the way equations were supposed to. A human custodian with an unnameable 3-note tune from a basement on Earth, achieving in 11 nights what a Derthari specialist of considerable reputation had failed to achieve in 2 days. I didn't have an explanation for him. I just had the mop and the motion and the quiet that comes when the hands are busy and the mind is gone. Somewhere easier. He left without another word. I finished the tile. On the 4th night, Admiral Sovenketh Ardeni was in the corridor. I had seen the Admiral from a distance, everyone on the ship had. He was a big man by Kareth standards, broader in the shoulder than most, with the pale silver skin of the Ardeni bloodline gone slightly ashen around the jaw from what I suspected was not much sleep. He had medals on his chest that I didn't know the names of, but there were a lot of them. He was standing exactly in the center of Corridor 7 with his arms at his sides, and he watched me get the bucket in position and start on the tile without saying anything. I hummed. I didn't do it to prove a point. My hands were moving, and my mind had gone to that quiet place it goes when the work is familiar, and the tune came up the same way it always does, without my thinking about it. 3 notes down, 2 up. The corridor light caught the wet tile. Somewhere behind that door, a 7-year-old boy who controlled more wealth than I would see in 40 lifetimes was presumably not screaming. "Custodian," the Admiral said. "Sir," I said. "What is your name?" "Lev Mora, sir. Deck 12 custodial staff, 6-year posting, Mora." He said it the way you say something you are trying to remember. "What is the melody?" "Old Earth tune, sir. My father's. I don't have a name for it." "What does it mean?" I stopped mopping for a second and thought about that. "I don't think it means anything," I said. He hummed it when he was fixing things. Boilers, mostly. Pipes. When the work was repetitive and he wanted something for his hands to keep time with. The Admiral looked at the door. "The physicians tell me you have solved what they could not." "I mop a corridor, sir," I said. "I always mop this corridor. Whatever the air is hearing is probably just the bucket wheels and the tune. He got used to them." "He asked for you," the Admiral said. I wasn't sure I'd heard that right. "Sir?" This afternoon, when Essie told him it was almost time for the night cycle, he asked if the mopping man was coming. The Admiral's voice was steady and even, and entirely unreadable. Those were his words. The mopping man. I didn't have an answer for that. I went back to the tile. "Is there something you want?" the Admiral asked. "For what you have done." "I haven't done anything, sir. I've mopped Corridor 7. For 11 nights. I mop it every night. That's the rotation." He was quiet for long enough that I looked up. He was watching me with an expression I didn't know how to read. Not the physician's professional puzzlement, not Essie's startled relief. Something older than both of those. Something that looked, if I was reading it right, a little like the way a man looks when he has been looking for something for a very long time, and has found it in the last place he thought to check. "Is there anything you need?" he said. "From the ship, from this posting, anything at all." I thought about it honestly. "I'd like to keep the same corridor rotation," I said. "Deck 12, sections 4 through 9. I know the floors well. The grout pattern in section 7's is tricky, and I've got the technique for it." The Admiral looked at me. "That's all?" "That's all, sir." He nodded. Once a slow, deliberate nod. "Done," he said. Then he didn't leave. He stood there looking at the door, and I had the sense that, whatever he was working out, it was going to take more than one corridor conversation to work out. "How long have you been a custodian?" he said. 30 years, give or take," I said. "Started on station maintenance when I was 28. Freight hauler after that 14 years. Then here, you chose it." "I did." "Why?" I stopped mopping and thought about that. It wasn't a question people asked much. "Because the work is always in front of you. I said. You can see when it's done. The floor is dirty, it's clean. There's no ambiguity about it. I've done other things, sir. Things with more ambiguity. I prefer the floor. He looked at me for a long moment. My son, he said, has lost his mother's voice. Not permanently, for 60 days. But to a 7-year-old, 60 days and permanently are not meaningfully different. No, I said. I suppose they're not. 3 physicians, 2 counselors, a specialist who has worked with 37 air children. He paused, and a custodian with a 3-note tune. I didn't set out to help, I said. I was mopping. I know, he said. And that somehow seemed to be the part that mattered to him. He stood there one more moment, looking at the door with those tired eyes, and then he straightened and walked away down the corridor without another word. I finished the tile. I moved to section 8. The door opened. I didn't look. I heard it open, heard the soft pad of small feet on the floor, them stop about 2 meters behind me. I kept mopping. I hummed, 3 notes down, 2 up. Don't go, said a voice behind me. Very small, very clear. The Ardennairs learn standard young. It's in the tutoring protocols, Essie had told me once. His accent was formal, careful, the way children sound when they are using a language they were taught, rather than absorbed. I didn't stop mopping. Not going anywhere, I said. Still got section 8. The small feet padded forward and stopped about half a meter to my right. I could see him in my peripheral vision. Small and silver pale in an enormous sleeping robe, large dark eyes pointed at the mop, moving in long slow strokes across the tile. He had a crease on his cheek from his pillow. His eyes were the deep gray violet of the Ardeni line, very large, watching the mop the way a cat watches something moving at exactly the right frequency. I hummed. After a while he sat down on the floor, cross-legged, straight-backed, with the dignity that 7-year-old heirs apparently practiced until it was involuntary. His enormous robe pooling around him on the clean tile. He watched the mop. I kept working. We were like that for a long time. The corridor light came down in its steady blue-white band. The mop moved. The bucket wheels gave their small, reliable squeak at each turn. The tune went its 3 notes down, 2 notes up loop, around and around, the same as it had gone in a basement on Earth 30 years ago, when a man with a pipe wrench and a bad knee taught it to his son without meaning to. Essie appeared in the doorway, took one look, and very quietly did not say anything. Essentially, Sovin's eyes closed. His chin dropped twice, caught itself, dropped again. The third time it didn't catch. He was asleep sitting up, straight-backed, even unconscious, the way people sleep when they've been trained not to slump. I set the mop quietly against the wall and lowered myself to the floor. My knee made its usual complaint about this, which I ignored, and I sat beside him and let him lean against my shoulder. And I kept humming very quietly until Essie came and lifted him with practiced hands and carried him back inside. She stopped in the doorway. She looked back at me, sitting on the clean tile of corridor 47, with my back against the wall and one leg out straight on account of the knee. He'll ask for you tomorrow, she said. It wasn't a question. I'll be here, I said. It's on the rotation. She shook her head just slightly, disappeared inside. I sat there a minute longer. The corridor was very quiet. The bucket sat where I'd left it, the mop leaning against the wall, tile damp and glossy under the light. 58 years old, a bad knee, 6 years on the Ardeni reach. Mopping floors that were already mostly clean. I got up, put the mop back in the bucket, and went to start on section 9. It was a good tile. I knew the grout well, I hummed.